What we're going to talk about in this lesson is characteristics of life. The picture that I have in front of you is a toy that looks like a dog. It can move and make sounds just like a real dog, however, it's a robot. In your science journal, I would like for you to write this question. Hold on just a second. This question right here. What characteristics are missing to make it alive? What characteristics are missing from this toy dog, this robot, that would make it alive? I want you to list at least 2 or 3 characteristics that you feel are missing from this toy dog right here that would make it alive. Remember, to be able to write this information down in your journal, you can pause this and restart it as soon as you're done writing. This is a question that you will be answering in your journal prior to coming to class. Okay, so what I want you to do is, I want you to put on your imagination cap. Okay? I want you to imagine adding water to a packet of powder and ending up with a tank full of swimming creatures. This may seem like science fiction, but believe it or not, it's true, and it can happen. Brine shrimp are small relatives of crabs and lobsters. Brine shrimp eggs, the small little eggs, can live for many years in a tiny hard case. When you add water and set up a proper environment for the eggs, the brine shrimp can hatch and thrive. What you're seeing right here would be a brine shrimp. Okay? What you may not have also known is that a class of 7th graders from Pennsylvania designed an experiment to see if space travel would affect brine shrimp eggs. They sent a packet of tiny eggs on the Space Shuttle Discovery in 1998 with U.S. Senator John Glenn. Now, the information, if you want to look into this further, is out on the internet, and if you Google brine shrimp in space, you'll find out many things about this experiment. But one of them that you'll find out is that actually those brine shrimp in that powdery package actually grew. 44 shrimp, 44 brine shrimp hatched and lived for a small period of time on the space shuttle in 1998. Okay, so in this lesson we're going to talk about characteristics of living things and non-living things so that you can determine characteristics. Okay, so what I need you to do is, I need you to open your science journal again because of course we have some things we need to talk about. One of the things as an essential question that you're going to be answering, not presently, but later on throughout this reading, you're going to be answering the question of what characteristics do all living things share? Write that question down. You can answer it later on as we go through the reading. The other things that we're going to be wanting you to write down would be the vocabulary words. They're listed right here, these vocabulary words. Here's the question, the essential question I just asked you about. Okay, so the vocabulary words are organism, cell, unicellular, multicellular, and homeostasis. Remember that when you see these vocabulary words, as we go through this reading, you're going to want to write the vocabulary word definition down next to the word itself so that you have something to study from. Again, I'm going to remind you that you can pause this video and write your definition and then restart or start the video where you left off. And also that if you're having difficulties with certain parts of the video, play it back. You can play it back as many times as you need to. Write questions down that you have that you don't understand and bring them to class so that we can talk about them. I would be glad to answer them. Okay, so a couple of more questions I want you to answer would be, first of all, this one here. How can we determine whether an advanced lifelike robot was alive? What's missing to make it alive? This question is very similar to the very first one I had you to write down, where I wanted you to list characteristics that makes that dog, what it's missing, characteristics that were missing to make that dog alive. This is a very, very similar question, but I want you to also write this one down as well as answering it. What's missing to make it alive? The second question I want you to write down would be this one. If a robot were made of biological materials and performed biological functions, would it be alive? 2 questions that you need to write down, and these 2 questions you need to answer presently. Don't wait for the answers to show up later. This is just information that I want you to write down now. Remember, again, stop at video and write the questions and then answer them and then restart it so that you can catch everything. Okay, I want you to take a look at the room that you're sitting in. Look around good. You're going to see many non-living things such as lights and books, tables, chairs, the computer in front of you. Now what I want you to do is look at the picture that's in front of you on the screen. You can see living things such as the teacher and the students that are there. What makes people and plants different from lights and books? Okay, now I want you to put your imagination caps on. While you're outside one day, you notice something strange in the grass. It's slimy, bright yellow, and about the size of a dime. Is it a plant part from a tree? Is it alive? How can you tell? An amazing variety of living things exist on Earth, but living things are all alike in several ways. What does a dog have in common with a mushroom? And what do you have in common with a slimy yellow blob, known as a slime mold? All living things share 6 characteristics. These characteristics help us decide whether something is living or not living. These characteristics also help us classify living things by their similarity and differences. All living things are organized, grow and develop, reproduce, respond, and maintain certain internal conditions, and also use energy. Non-living things might have some of these characteristics, but they do not have all of them. Only those things that have all the characteristics of life are living. Things that have all the characteristics of life are called organisms. So I'm going to put this down here, and you are going to write your first definition, your vocabulary. Things that have all the characteristics of life are called organisms. That's this right here. Please write it in your science journal as well as its definition. Okay, so I hope you would think that I would ask this question, and that is, how do living things differ from non-living things? This is a question you need to write in your science journal right now and answer. We probably just talked about it in the prior information, so you should be able to answer this one. How do living things differ from non-living things? Okay, the next question I want you to answer and put in your science journal, or we'll do it this way, put it in your science journal, then answer it, is how many living things can you list? How many non-living things can you list? Go ahead, I just want you to try. I want you to put down a list of living things that you see and non-living things that you see, and I want to see that list when you come into class. If you want to make that question a bit more interesting, and it's still daylight, why don't you step outside with a piece of paper? Sit down somewhere close and just observe. Remember, we talked about observation with our last lessons. Just observe the things around you and see if you can pick out living and non-living things and list them on your piece of paper. That would be great to bring into class so that we can really discuss what's going on around us in nature. Okay, now we're going to talk about organization, which is one of those characteristics that determine whether something is living or non-living. As you know, your house is probably organized in some way. As a small example, sort of like your kitchen is for cooking and your bedroom is for sleeping. Living things are also organized, whether an organism is made of one cell or many cells. All living things have structures that have specific functions. Okay, so now it's time for you to write one of those vocabulary words down, and that is cell. A cell is the smallest unit of life. Okay, write that down in your science journal so that you have it for later. I've touched on cell here just a second ago where I talked about organization. About an organism made of one cell or many cells all have specific functions. Okay, so maybe I need to take a step back because now we're talking about cells and there are a couple other things you need to know about cells before we go any further. So as you know, cell is the smallest unit of life, but something that's classified as a cell can be either unicellular, which is a living thing that's made of only one cell. Okay, I'm going to do this because I want you to know this. UNI means one. Notice that the definition is one-celled, unicellular. Okay, so that's one of a couple. Okay, so we'll make this small. We're going to bring up the other one, which is multicellular, which is a living thing that's made of two or more cells. Multi, M-U-I-L-T-I, multi, means many. Okay, so it's either unicellular, bring that one back over, which means one-celled, or multicellular, meaning two or more cells. Within a unicellular organism, there are structures with specialized functions just like a house has room for different activities. Some structures take in nutrients or control the cell's activity. Other structures enable the organism to move. Some multicellular organisms only have a few cells, while others have trillions of cells. The different cells of a multicellular organism usually do not perform the same function. Again, I'm going to say that again. They usually do not perform the same function. Instead, the cells are organized into groups that have specialized functions, such as digestion or movement. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to ask some questions. I'm going to make some things a little smaller here. Give myself some room. Okay. Please make sure, though, that you are writing those vocab words down with their definitions. Okay, so the first question I want to ask you is something that we just now talked about, and that is, what is the smallest unit of life? Okay, make sure you write that question down in your science journal, as well as answering it, please. What is the smallest unit of life? The next question I want to ask you, write it in your science journal, and that is, in what way is a unicellular organism like a house with various rooms for various functions? The next question I want you to write down would be, why do you think a unicellular organism needs structures that perform specialized functions? Why do you think a unicellular organism needs structures that perform specialized functions? Make sure you're writing the question down as well as the answer. You are answering these presently. Okay, so going on, I'm going to close this down, move them out of our way, so that we can go on to one more characteristic that we need to talk about. And that one would be growth and development. Okay, growth and development. If you take a look at the picture that we have right here, okay, the tadpole in this picture is not a frog, but it will soon lose its tail, grow legs, and become an adult frog. This happens because the tadpole, like all organisms, will grow and develop. I need you to remember that the term grow means to increase in size. In a unicellular organism, growth is when the cell increases in size. In a multicellular organism, growth is when the number of the cells increase. Remembering our terms, unicellular means one-celled. Again, when it grows, the cell size increases. Multicellular, which means two or more cells, growth in this organism, this type of an organism, means the number of cells increase. You're adding to the number of cells. I want you to remember that when an organism grows, it experiences changes which are called development. Okay, now I want to ask you a couple of 3 more questions that you're going to write in your science journal having to do with this picture. I'm going to make this picture a tad bit smaller, okay? And by the way, this isn't the last you're going to see of this picture. You know steps 1 and 2 aren't the only 2 things that happen in the process here, but they're the 2 steps that I wanted to show you for right now because we're talking about developing and changing, and these are the main changes. So one question that I want you to write down now is, what characteristics of life can you identify in that picture? Figure 2 is the picture that's up above that. What characteristics of life can you identify so far in that picture? Okay, the next one I want to ask you is, what developmental changes does a tadpole go through in becoming a frog? What developmental changes? You might want to hang on to this one until our next frame, because the next frame has the second part to this picture so that you can answer this. Okay? But I wanted to throw that question out there so you're listening for this answer and looking for it in the pictures. The third question I want to ask you would be, what happens in development? What happens in development? Please make sure you're writing all 3 of those questions down and answering them with the information that you have so far. Okay, picking up where we left off, changes that occur in an organism during its lifetime are called development. In multicellular organisms, development happens as cells become specialized into different cell types, such as your skin cells or your muscle cells. Some organisms undergo dramatic developmental changes over its lifetime, such as, the tadpole changing into the frog, which is the frog that you're seeing on the screen. So at this point, once you take a look at what the picture is here on the screen of the frogs, and remember that the tadpole was the first thing we talked about, you might want to go back and answer the question that I had asked you earlier about the developmental changes from a tadpole to a frog. I'll let you go ahead and do that. You pause, go back and answer that question, and then start this back up again, and we're going to go ahead and talk. Okay, now I want to talk about reproduction. Reproduction is another one of those characteristics that's involved in determining whether something is living or non-living. As an organism grows and develops, they usually are able to reproduce. Reproduction is the process by which one organism makes one or more new organisms. In order for living things to continue to exist, organisms must reproduce. As you know, organisms don't all reproduce in the same way. Some organisms, like these here, which are bacteria, can reproduce by dividing and becoming two new organisms. Taking a look at this picture, you can see the cells starting to divide. They're making an identical copy of itself, splitting in half. These are unicellular organisms, or one-celled organisms. The two new organisms are identical to the original organism. As you know, other organisms have specialized cells for reproduction. Some organisms must have a mate to reproduce, but others can reproduce without a mate. The number of offspring produced varies. You know that humans usually produce only one or two offspring at a time. Other offspring, such as the tadpoles and the frogs that we've talked about, can produce hundreds of offspring at one time. Okay, something I want to point out to you right now is unless a species is successful at reproduction and survival, it might become extinct. Some organisms survive as species because they reproduce in large numbers, or they produce a large amount of offspring. Although most of the offspring don't make it to adulthood, enough of them do so that the species survives to reproduce again. This enables the continuation of that species. So at this point, I want to ask you a few questions, and I want you to write them down in your science journal. The first question I want you to answer and to write down would be this one. What is reproduction? What is reproduction? Kind of important since we've been talking about it. The next one I want you to answer is, how do unicellular organisms, such as bacteria, reproduce? We just talked about this one. Matter of fact, the picture that we talked about is still right there, so you might want to refresh your memory. And the last one that I want you to write down would be this one. Is it necessary for all offspring of an individual to survive in order for the species to survive itself? Okay, so make sure you're writing those questions down in your science journal, and then I want you to answer them from the information that we've talked about. All organisms have the ability to sense change in their environment and to respond to those changes. A change that affects the activities of an organism is called a stimulus. Remember that I mentioned earlier that one characteristic of living things is that response to the stimuli, which is multiple stimuluses, both internal and external. As an example, if someone throws a ball towards you, you might react by trying to catch it. This is because you, like all living things, respond to changes in the environment. You respond to internal stimuli every day. When you're hungry, you look for food, you are responding to an internal stimuli. The feeling of hunger is a stimuli. Changes in an organism's environment that affect the organism are external stimuli. Some examples of this might be light and temperature. Stimuli can be chemical, gravity, light, sounds, hunger, or anything that causes organisms to respond in some way. A gentle touch causes a response in the plant that is shown in the picture up above right here. If you notice, the fly lands on the plant, that's in this one here, but here is the reaction. The reaction you're seeing is the response to a stimuli. The fly, in this case, touched the leaf, which has little hairs on it. Once the little hairs are triggered, the response would be this. That is a response to stimuli. Like the Venus flytrap, your body also responds to stimuli. Remember that temperature is one of the things that can be considered as a stimuli. The diagram I put up shows a home or your house on the left. You'll notice that there is a fan to keep things cool and a heater to warm things up. Like your home, your body can be considered your home. Okay, your body can be considered your home. When you're too warm, your body can turn on its air conditioner, so to speak, and it sweats. Sweat is a form of cooling off of your body. When you're too cold, your body also does something that will allow your body to try to heat up, and that is to make movement in your muscles, which would be considered shivering. That movement allows your body to produce energy, and the energy being produced can produce heat, which will warm your body. Okay, what I want you to do now is answer some questions for me. Okay, the first one I want you to answer is this one right here. What are two examples of external stimuli? What are two examples of external stimuli? The next one I want you to write down in your science journal and answer would be this one. What are two internal stimuli that people respond to on a regular basis? Okay, and the third one, not the last one, the third one that I want you to answer would be this one. How can an external stimuli create an internal stimuli? It's going to have to make you think a little bit, but recall back to some of the things we've talked about. And now the last question I want you to write in your science journal from this part right here would be, what are a couple of unpleasant internal stimuli that people would rather not experience? Okay, think about those, then write your answers so that we can talk about them at a later time. Have you ever noticed that if you drink more water than you usually do, you have to go to the bathroom more often? That's because your body is working to keep that internal environment under normal conditions. An organism's ability to maintain steady internal conditions when outside conditions change is called homeostasis. Homeostasis just happens to be another one of our vocabulary words, so I'm going to make room so that you can write the definition. Your vocabulary word is homeostasis, and you will find your definition right there with it. Remember that it's an organism's ability to maintain steady internal conditions when outside conditions change. Okay, once you've written that definition, I want you to think about this. Why is maintaining homeostasis important to an organism? Why would that be? Why is it important to maintain homeostasis in an organism? Okay, so let's think about this. Are there certain conditions you need to do your homework? Maybe you need a quiet room with a lot of light, or maybe you need your headphones on with music playing. Well, did you know that cells also need certain conditions to function properly? Maintaining certain conditions, which is homeostasis, ensures that cells can function. If cells can't function normally, then an organism might become sick or even die. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at this picture again. As you recall, I told you that the house regulates temperature like your body regulates temperature. There are certain things that you do. A person might not survive if his or her body temperature changes more than a few degrees from 37 degrees Celsius, which is 98.6. When your outside environment becomes too hot or too cold, your body responds by doing some of these things, which one would be sweating, another one would be shivering. Okay, to try to maintain that temperature, that's what your body does. There is a limit to the amount of change that can occur within an organism. For example, You are able to survive only a few hours in water that is below 10 degrees Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. No matter what your body does, it cannot maintain steady internal conditions or homeostasis under these circumstances. As a result, your cells lose the ability to function. Okay, so homeostasis is a very important process that we need to remember. Remember that everything you do requires energy, from digesting your food to you sleeping or thinking or reading. Using this energy is all characteristic of life. Cells continuously use energy to transport substances, make new cells, and perform chemical reactions. You may ask, where does this energy come from? For most organisms, this energy originally came to Earth from the sun. The sun is a source of energy for most all of life on Earth. Okay, so we're going to use this diagram right here, which is a food web. And we're going to talk about how energy moves from one organism to another organism in the food web itself. This energy web shows food movement in a desert ecosystem. Each ecosystem, depending on where you're located, such as a forest or a rainforest or a desert or ocean, has a unique food web. Each are different from each other. A food web is a collection of overlapping food chains. As an example, one of the food chains that you have in this picture would be the food chain from the sun to the sagebrush, to the squirrel, to the coyote. Another example might be the one with the sun to the cactus, over to the pronghorn, and up to the mountain lion. For most ecosystems, the sun is the main source of energy. Plants in the ecosystem, such as the sagebrush or the prickly pear cactus, use that sun's energy and perform photosynthesis to produce its own energy. Items such as the sagebrush and the prickly pear cactuses are called producers. Again, they get their energy from the sun and produce their energy using photosynthesis. The food energy that's being produced by the producers is then available to other organisms in the food chain. Animals that eat producers and other animals are called consumers. As one organism eats another, the energy is moved through the ecosystem. Hey, please remember that this food web is just showing some of the many organisms that could be in an environment like this. It's not a complete picture, but it just gives you an idea as to how energy moves within the food web in this ecosystem. To summarize this food web, the energy starts with the sun and goes to the producer and then is taken in by the consumer. The producers here use energy from the sun and produce their own energy using photosynthesis. Okay, so now I want to ask some important questions. Okay, so let's make this small and make this small and write these questions in your science journal and answer them using the information that you have just heard. What do cells use energy for? What do cells use energy for? The next question, make sure you're writing it in your science journal. Which organisms get their energy directly from the sun? Which organisms get the sun's energy indirectly? And how do they get it? Okay, 2 questions there, but I want them both answered. Which organisms get their energy directly from the sun? And which organisms get sun's energy indirectly, which means not directly from the sun, but indirectly through something else? And how do they get it? The next question. What characteristics do all living things share? You'll notice the red check mark on the gold key. That means it's one of our key concept questions, so it's something we need to pay particular attention to. The last one I want you to write down and answer would be, from which food source does the badger in that picture get its energy? So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to pause this, write your question down, go back to the diagram of the food web, and see if you can answer that question. Okay, I want to see if you were paying attention. All right, so we're going to go on to the next information. Okay, so at this time we're going to start summarizing those 6 characteristics that we talked about, the characteristics of life. And I'm going to have you be patient with me for a second while I make part of this larger. Okay, there's 3 of them right there. Remember that one of those was organization, where we talked about cells and how some cells are specialized. Also remember growth and development. Living things grow by increasing cell size and or cell numbers, depending on the type of organism it is. We also remember reproduction is very important. Living things make more living things through the process of reproduction. All right, so those are 3 of the 6 characteristics we've talked about. Okay, I'm going to move this up. I'm going to make this so that we can see it a little better. The other 3 that we've talked about was response to stimuli. That would be homeostasis. All right, homeostasis is right here is another one. Response to stimuli, of course, would be the external environments and the internal environments. The last one would be use of energy, like the food web that we talked about. Those things are the 6 characteristics that you're going to need to know. Please make sure that you've taken some notes and written down some of this information, because those 6 characteristics are going to be important for you to be able to provide additional information later on in other chapters. Okay, so those 6 things are very important. So let me go ahead and close some of this down. Next thing I want you to do is I want you to write these last 3 questions down, please. Write these last 3 questions down. What are the 6 characteristics of life? Okay, we just went over all 6 of them, so this question should be easy for you. If you need to, you can go back and look, but why don't you try, before you go back and look, try to answer this one on your own so that you know you can do it. Okay? The second question I want you to write down and answer would be, what are 2 kinds of stimuli to which organisms respond? What are 2 kinds of What are 2 kinds of stimuli to which organisms respond? Okay? The last one I want you to put in your science journal with an answer would be, what is the difference between growth and development? We talked about that one also. All right, so those 3 questions need to be written down in your science journal, and they also need to be answered from the information that we've talked about. Okay, so what you will find to follow would be the lesson review. You are to write your answers only to the lesson review, so please make sure that you have paper handy. You're going to bring those in and we're going to review them in class. At this point, you need to start your lesson review. If you do not understand any of the points that we went over in this lesson, please go back and review what you don't understand, or go back and review all of it. It doesn't hurt. Okay? If you have specific questions about things that you don't understand, please make sure that you are asking me in class, or you can bring it to me at lunchtime or after school. My door is always open to answer questions. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you learned a lot. I think I'll find that out a little bit more, though, when we go over the lesson review, which is on the next part to this. Again, this is the lesson review information, and I want you to write down just the answer, okay? You're going to bring the information to class. You're answering all the questions 1 through 11 to the best of your ability. You're bringing your information to class, and you're going to be able to check them, or we're going to go through them so that you understand before we have a quiz or a test over the information. Okay? I hope that you've gotten all the information you need, and I know for a fact that you will do a very good job on this. Thank you.